I built this superhero game in the Godot game engine using AI, and the entire process took only 20 chat prompts. I started by giving Claude Fable 5, GPT-5.6 Sol, and Kimi K3 the same initial prompt. Then I picked my favorite build and kept pushing it until I had the version you just saw. In this video, I'm gonna walk you through the entire process, so grab some popcorn, sit back, and hit that subscribe button so I can afford to pay this API bill. We're starting with the first step that every elite veteran game developer takes, which is obviously creating all the 3D assets before touching the game. And to do that, I'm using the sponsor of this video, Meshy AI. I wanted 4 playable heroes, each with completely different powers and movement. Instead of searching for characters online and hoping all their models matched, I started building the lineup in Meshy. I began with its AI image generator, selected an A pose, and described an all-gold armored superhero on a solid green background. Meshy generated 4 concepts, and one of them was already extremely close to the look I wanted, so I chose that one and sent it through image to 3D. Once the model was generated, I used Meshy's texturing tools to give it the final surface detail. The original Mesh had around 300,000 faces, which is a little excessive for a character that I plan to launch across a city at irresponsible speeds. So I used Meshy's remesh tool to reduce it to just over 20,000 faces. The difference in quality was surprisingly small, but the new version made far more sense for a game. From there, I rigged the character by placing the joint markers around the elbows, knees, chin, and the rest of the body. Meshy also has a full animation library, but for this test, I deliberately stopped after rigging. I wanted to see how well the AI would do if I just gave it the Meshy API key and asked them to use that to animate the 3D characters. With that first character ready, I sent the initial game prompt to Fable using the gold hero as a temporary body for all 4 characters. I wanted it to focus on the mechanics while I finished the rest of the cast. A few minutes later, Fable 5 was done, and I had a game with 4 different colored animated pretzels. I honestly don't know how it managed to do this to the rigged character, but mechanically, it was already doing some interesting things. The web swinging had a natural rhythm, the flying hero had a sonic boom, the armored hero had an in-helmet display and thrusters, and the speedster had strong electrical effects. While Fable worked on its next pass, I repeated the Meshy process for the rest of the team. A dark web-slinging hero, a red speedster, and a flying hero with a cape. For each one, I generated several concepts, chose the strongest image, converted it into 3D, optimized it, textured it, and rigged it. One speedster had its legs too close together for reliable animation, and the first batch for the flying hero was not giving me the look I wanted. I adjusted the description, generated another batch, and chose a better option. This is also where Meshy's latest major feature, the 3D agent, changes the workflow. You can describe an idea, have the agent brainstorm directions with you, and refine the result in the same chat. It can search the web for reference images, generate batches of concepts in different styles, and turn the concept you select into a 3D model. You can also ask for low-poly game assets directly through the chat. Later in the build, I used it to create the thugs, choppers, tank, and other vehicles you saw in the opening gameplay. After a few more prompts, I gave Fable the proper Meshy characters and asked it to clean up the experience. In my playtest, this version had the best movement and hero-specific gameplay. The web-slinging hero could swing and crawl along walls, the speedster could run up buildings, and the other 2 had their own flight and combat powers. Next was GPT. Its city looked cleaner, and it easily had the best interface. The character selection screen, control guides, minimap, and speed display all looked polished. I gave it a second prompt to use the finished Meshy characters, add more animations and unique powers, and bring in enemies, choppers, vehicles, and explosions. The result looked more complete, but the gameplay was less consistent. Web swinging regularly targeted the wrong building, several abilities seemed to share the same effect, and some of the heroes did not feel different enough from each other. GPT understood how to present the game, but Fable understood how I wanted it to feel. Then I tested Kimi. Its first pass also had a strong interface and some good-looking electrical and city effects, but the character animation and controls needed more correction. Based on what I had tested so far, Fable was still the foundation I wanted to continue building. So I took Fable's version and handed it to Claude Opus 5 to see how far I could push the winning concept. My first idea was to rebuild it in Unity. I had never used Unity for a project like this, which made giving an AI total control over it feel like a very responsible first lesson. About an hour later, I opened the result. The city looked like it had been made from folded paper. The character was lying halfway inside the floor while staring at the sky, and most of the important combat systems, audio, and interface were missing. Technically, it was a game. Emotionally, it was a cry for help. So instead of spending more prompts repairing that version, I stopped the Unity attempt and asked Opus to rebuild it in Godot. The city had fog and actual atmosphere, the heroes were upright, the controller worked, and the main powers had carried over. The flying hero leaned into his movement, broke the ground when he landed, and sent enemies flying. The armored hero had rockets and explosions. The biggest remaining problem was that several transferred animations were damaged, and the world still needed real enemies, vehicles, and detail. I asked Opus to make a complete list of everything the game was missing. That list became my prompt for the Meshy 3D agent. Instead of generating each object through a separate disconnected workflow, I pasted the full request into one conversation and asked for a matching asset pack. Enemy thugs, a tank, a helicopter, civilian cars, and a list of the animation clips the characters would need. The agent started with the enemy thug, generated the model, textured it, and let me inspect it in 3D. From that same conversation, I generated the tank, the helicopter, and the other vehicles. The first versions were highly detailed, so I asked Meshy to remesh and optimize them for the game as well. Because they followed the same superhero city direction, the complete pack felt visually connected, and I could review and correct the entire set through the conversation. I found most animations I needed in the Meshy library, but there were still some specific animations I needed that I couldn't find. So I took the existing rigged assets and took them into my personal platform, NoirStage, and tweaked the existing animations to get the desired results. In NoirStage, I corrected the scale and forward direction, cleaned up the animation loops, turned an existing diving motion into a forward flight pose, created a floating animation for the armored hero, and prepared a separate hand blast motion. I also used NoirStage to normalize the size of all the assets and add spatial notes to areas of the assets where the visual effects should appear. Headlights and taillights on the cars, the firing point on the tank cannon, and the weapon positions on the helicopter. While I was preparing all of that, Opus was working on a major visual polish prompt for the city. That single pass ran for almost 4 hours, but when it finished, the environment was dramatically better. There was more detail, stronger lighting, better effects, and the whole project finally looked much closer to the game I had imagined. The controls and camera still needed work, so the final prompts were about bringing everything together. I told Opus to replace the broken characters with the finished Meshy heroes, add the new thugs and vehicles, reuse the corrected humanoid animations, connect the effects to the notes I had placed, and bring in the 5 civilian car variants so the city did not look like the same person had ordered the exact same car 5 times. Once that final integration was complete, I had the version you saw at the beginning. This is obviously not a finished commercial game. The camera could use more tuning, some animations could be smoother, and I could keep adding missions, enemies, and destruction for another month. But as a playable foundation built from one idea, 4 custom heroes, and a matching asset pack, I'm genuinely happy with how far it came. I'll leave the link to the game below if you want to play it. If you have an idea of your own, you can create 3D game assets in conversation with Meshy now at 50% off. Use the link below to check it out. Thank you again to Meshy for sponsoring the video, and if you enjoyed this build, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.